At the start of my career, I was once buying an airline ticket when a middle-aged woman behind the counter suddenly leant towards me and whispered, "Isn't sex wonderful?" As one of Australia's first sex therapists, I'd become the person that everyone wanted to talk to about sex, a topic which was then quite taboo. Now, over 40 years later, I'm still being bailed up in the street with people wanting to talk to me not about lost erections or elusive orgasms, but today's taboo topic, which is what's happening to men and boys in this anti-male society. I'm one of the few people speaking out about these issues in Australia. I'm very aware that I'm on my own because most people can't afford to take the risks. I don't have as much to lose at the end of a long, very public career. But I'm also attracting particular attention at the moment because in the last year I've had a huge stroke of luck. The feminists overplayed their hand. Since last September, I've been out on university campuses giving talks about the fake rape crisis, drawing attention to the misleading scare campaign being used by feminist activists to claim our campuses are unsafe for young women. At the first stop in my tour, the university tried to ban my talk, claiming it clashed with the values of the university. That led to great media coverage. Even better, at the next stop at Sydney University, there was a very rowdy protest with activists blocking entry to the venue until the riot squad was brought in to remove them. That led to huge media scrutiny, with the videos of the protest shown everywhere. Not a great look for the activists, with this grandma being shown with angry young women screaming at her, telling her to F off. The government then announced an inquiry into free speech on campuses, which ultimately led to the universities being pushed very reluctantly into introducing new free speech codes. This has all been very effective in alerting people to what I'm up to, and gradually I'm getting some exposure for the main game behind my campus tour, which is to draw public attention to the alarming trend for our universities to establish secret committees to investigate and adjudicate rape on campus, using lower standards of proof to ensure more convictions. This is, of course, very similar to what happened in America, which resulted in so many young men being falsely accused and thrown out of their universities. I've made 2 videos with young men wrongly accused and pursued by Australian university committees, and I come across many similar cases. I'm working with some very serious legal figures to try to figure out how we can stop this happening. The funniest aspect of my Sydney University protest was I managed to use the activists' bullying and harassment laws against them. I put in a formal complaint to the university, naming the key organisers of the protest, backed up by hours of video evidence. After over 8 months of investigation, the university charged the key organiser, Maddie Ward, with misconduct. You can see that young lady here, flashing her tits at anti-abortion campaigners. She's a serial protester. So that's all played out pretty well, serving to draw attention to the various other battles I'm involved in. I'm constantly swamped with men who are really happy that someone's standing up for them, but it's also very encouraging how many women are on side. Last year I published a collection of my writings about men's issues, #Men2, and I went on a breakfast television show where I was interviewed by 2 female hosts who were very sympathetic to my arguments about the unfair treatment of men. I talked about bias in family law, false violence and rape accusations, #MeToo, male suicide rates, the campus rape scare campaign. It triggered a huge response from their mainly female audience, with nearly 5,000 likes on their Facebook page, compared to about 200 critical responses. But unsurprisingly, the feminists went on the attack, publishing articles criticising these television hosts for being too supportive to me. But that's the point. The majority are on side and becoming increasingly fed up at the male bashing. What we need to do is mobilise their discontent. I'm working to get more people on board, more volunteers really willing to write letters, start protests, talk to local members of parliament and try to change the cultural dialogue. We have the numbers, we just have to use them. I've talked recently to government ministers who say they only ever hear from the other side when it comes to all these gender issues. They're bombarded with feminists promoting misleading feminist misinformation about issues like domestic violence and campus rape, while the rest of us remain silent. But if we get enough people on board, we can give the politicians courage to ignore the activists. Last year, one of our most appalling feminist activists, Clementine Ford, was supposed to be speaking at a seminar on domestic violence for Lifeline, which is a service organisation providing support for people in trouble. Lifeline cancelled the event after 15,000 people signed a petition protesting the involvement of Ford, who regularly tweets about killing men. Here she is talking about her new baby son.
Ugh, I'm so sick of talking about men. Ugh, I have a male baby and it's just all the time, it's feed me, pay me attention to me, engage me. Ugh, so boring. Men, 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 men. It's always about men.
We started an End Violence Against Everybody petition as a response to a charity organisation called Mission Australia, which was running a homelessness campaign based around a woman and her child cowering from a violent man. We bombarded the organisation with complaints and finally managed to get some male domestic violence victims to meet with their CEO. This year we saw a small step forward. Mission Australia featured a male victim in their latest campaign, a man who'd grown up being abused by his mother. One day they might even mention a violent wife, but we're not holding our breath. It's never steady progress. There was great excitement a few years back when our New South Wales state government announced the first ever funding for male domestic violence victims. But reality set in when we discovered the funding was given to a male virtue signalling organisation called Men's Referral Service, long known for assuming male victims are in fact perpetrators. Amazingly, it's official government policy to assume that a man who's claiming to be a male victim of domestic violence is a likely perpetrator. Telephone counselling services are able to contact police to track down the partners of alleged male victims to check out their stories. Can you imagine the outcry if that was to happen with female victims? I'm an eternal Pollyanna, and I choose to focus on small cracks emerging in the feminist narrative, like the Brisbane police station, which had a white ribbon day, where police were filmed making pledges to stand up against violence against women. Some of the police refused to do this and made pledges to stand up against violence against everybody. Naturally, their pledges were filmed, but never shown my white ribbon. At least they had the courage to take a stand. Then there was last year's research into blind recruiting in the public service, where gender was stripped from all job applications. The assumption was this would help women overcome discrimination, but the opposite proved to be true. Blind recruiting was found to advantage men because there's already such a strong bias in favour of women in our feminised society. Naturally, the public servants were then advised that blind recruiting had to go. Isn't that a hoot? Anti-male grandstanding by men in power is also being called out. Last year I made a video about the push to allow women to join men's sheds. The men's shed movement is all about providing men with a place to get away, to enjoy male company and provide support for one another. That's really important with older men who are at the highest risk of suicide. My video revealed that the chairman of the Men's Shed Association, who had a background in promoting equity in the workplace, didn't believe there was anything special about the male culture and was all for having women in sheds. Boy, did he feel the heat when my video was published. Yes, the wicked witches are still winning in Australia. We live in a country where laws, rules and regulations are firmly favouring women at the expense of men. But there's a start of a fight back. Recently we've witnessed a few stunning victories which give us hope that our men's lives are not necessarily doomed. In January I released a video telling the extraordinary story of Sarah Jane Parkinson, who was sentenced to 3 years in prison as a result of false rape and domestic violence allegations. She'd sent her ex-fiancé to prison by using a fake rape scenario where she smashed her own head with a brick, planted an empty condom packet, very considerate rapist using a condom, and then claimed the cat ate the condom. I made a YouTube video with Dan Jones, Parkinson's victim, and then 60 Minutes devoted a whole hour to this extraordinary case, which led to a huge public outpouring of sympathy for Dan and his family, but also anger at the way our laws can be used by malicious women to punish men. My feeling is we've got to use these moments to harness the goodwill of ordinary people who've watched appalled as our legal system has been tilted towards believe the victim justice. We've also recently seen the spectacular collapse of 2 high-profile Australian Me Too cases, both involving actors who ended up in court after a well-known feminist activist elicited Me Too accusations about high-profile men. Both men, Geoffrey Rush and John Jarratt, were actors who'd been around for years but happened to be hitting the peak of their careers. Both actors found themselves publicly named and shamed, with unproven accusations published in lurid newspaper stories before any proper investigation or trial. Ultimately, Geoffrey Rush won big, over $850,000 in defamation costs against a newspaper which defamed him as King Lear, and there's probably more money to come. His accuser was found to be an unreliable witness. John Jarratt was accused of raping a housemaid over 40 years ago, but his accuser's story was full of holes and the case was dismissed by a unanimous jury after 15 minutes deliberation. Jarratt's now calling for withholding of names in rape cases until proven guilty.
Freedom! Freedom!
The silent majority hate what is happening. There's no question there's growing concern about #MeToo having gone off the rails, being used by vile women to publish any man who's annoyed them. I think MeToo's done us a huge service in revealing the excesses of the feminist movement, their disregard for normal standards of fair treatment, and their blatant promotion of believe the victim narratives. I think there's increasing public disquiet about our anti-male culture. A couple of years ago, I was approached by a film company asking me to take part in a documentary on sexism being made for one of our public broadcasters, SBS. I was pressured to take part to comment on survey results showing most Australians have real concerns about the way sexism is being normally portrayed. Those statistics were very revealing. Only 19% of Australians identify as feminist. Almost half the population, 45%, feel feminism has gone too far. And by far the majority, 76%, feel men suffer from sexism too. So I did the interview and persuaded others to get involved. But when the program came out, it was called Is Australia Sexist?, they ditched anything that challenged the feminist narrative, and all my interview ended up on the cutting floor. They simply promoted the usual male-bashing dogma we've come to expect from our public broadcasters. It was full of stories exposing our sexist country, showing little girls being taught that men always get paid more, women afraid to walk down public streets. The compere ended up in tears at the thought of her children facing such ordeals. It's still true that most of our mainstream media is pushing the feminist narrative, but this whole incident revealed most normal people are increasingly unhappy at the anti-male agenda. And finally, there are people prepared to speak out, like the retired police chief who came to me wanting to talk about his experience as a cop, watching false accusations of violence being used as a weapon in family court battles. I made a YouTube video with him talking about the role of police in enforcing unjust laws and the pressure police are under to believe victims when they make accusations of violence that can be used to have a man thrown out of his house or denied contact with his children. I've just made a video with a rural consultant, Mary O'Brien, a woman who wrote a blog about male suicide after 2 men in her community took their lives. She called out the bullshit being promoted, suggesting we'll stop male violence by getting men to talk about their feelings. Mary speaking out about the real problems at the heart of many raw men's suicide. Family breakup, false accusations of violence, men denied access to their children, all made much worse when men can't afford to leave their drought-stricken farms to attend court hearings. Then there's Emma. She's a jazz musician who contacted me nearly 2 years ago because she was angry about quotas being imposed in the music industry, trying to ensure more women win prizes by fixing the committees and recipients of music awards. She's a very talented young woman who battled her way through to winning some of Australia's top music awards before gender quotas were introduced. So she ended up spending a whole year handling my social media from New York, just one of many volunteers helping with my various battles. I have a growing team of people working alongside me, which certainly helps me weather the constant attacks I'm receiving. In the last 2 years, I've been hit with a defamation case, an endless stream of malicious articles and television shows, misrepresenting what I'm doing, 2 complaints to the Health Commission challenging my professional qualifications, and so it goes on. Amongst the feminist attacks on me, the funniest is the claim that I gave up talking about sex to promote men's issues because it was more lucrative. What a joke. I could have continued to have a pretty comfortable career speaking about sex, a topic everybody loves to hear about. I'm earning little or no income trying to talk about issues a very powerful group seeks to silence. Yet occasionally I do return to my own old stomping ground, combining my 2 passions. One of the biggest responses I've ever had on Twitter followed my comment about an article about emojis, which included a symbol for small dicks used to put men down. Here's my response. Thanks everybody for supporting me on my YouTube channel. I've got growing numbers of subscribers, which is really exciting. If you'd like to support me financially, go to my donate page on my website. Thanks a lot.